But then I learned there was an actual text manuscript in William Shakespeare's own hand. Not a play he had written, a play written by someone else that he had helped rewrite. This is the famous Sir Thomas More script, and Hand D, or the fourth writer, is believed to be William Shakespeare, and if so, this is the only text manuscript in William Shakespeare's own hand. And this is where there's a fascinating Canadian connection. Now, this theory that the only text manuscript of William Shakespeare is this Hand D in the Sir Thomas More script goes back to the 19th century. And in the year 1960, the Stratford Festival in Ontario, Canada, was doing some lectures, and they had a brilliant idea. They said, hey, why don't we confirm once and for all that William Shakespeare did write this Hand D? They knew of it. And they had a really interesting way of doing that. They went to the National Police Force of Canada in Ottawa, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the famous Mounties, and they asked, do you have a handwriting expert? They said, do we ever? We have the handwriting expert, Commissioner Roy A. Huber, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. He wrote the book on handwriting analysis. As a matter of fact, the book is still available on Amazon to this day. It's called Handwriting Identification, Facts and Fundamentals by Roy A. Huber. So they went to this Roy Huber and they said, look, we have a copy of the Hand D, it's 3 pages or so, and we have the signatures. There were 3 signatures on the will, as you know, and there are 3 other signatures and documents, the 6 signatures. And they said, could you confirm that this is William Shakespeare's handwriting? Come to Stratford and give a speech. It's a wonderful idea. It's not every day a Mountie gets invited to Stratford. He said yes. He didn't know what he was taking on. It turned out, as you know, the writing back then is very different from ours. It's called secretary hand. But Roy A. Huber spent 3 months studying this, made a full analysis, and became an expert at reading this type of writing. Comes to Stratford. They're all sitting there, much like today, waiting for him to confirm once and for all that this is indeed Shakespeare's handwriting. And he announces, quote, a positive identification of Shakespeare as Hand D is not possible, unquote. Shock goes through the room. What do you mean? The last thing they wanted to do is open up a can of worms. We're Canada. We don't do these things. Well, that was the end of Hand D. Only it wasn't. A very strange thing happened. Nothing. Well, that's when I realized why none of the Shakespeare authorship questions had ever been mentioned to me in all my studies, leading to a Ph.D. in theater. Because Shakespeare's not factual. Shakespeare's not historical. Shakespeare is, in fact, a religion. And it cannot be questioned. Sigmund Freud, founder of psychoanalysis, said Shakespeare never was a writer. I never heard that in all my studies. Walt Whitman, the poet, said Shakespeare never was a writer. Henry James, the 19th century essayist and novelist, he said, quote, I'm haunted by the conviction that the Divine William is the biggest and most successful fraud ever practiced, unquote. There's that Divine William. Religion again. Mark Twain. The Mark Twain. Huckleberry Finn, Tom Sawyer. Studied Shakespeare's biography, actually traveled to Stratford-upon-Avon to investigate, and decided it was all hogwash. Mark Twain even wrote a book about it. Here's a copy of it. 1909, Is Shakespeare Dead? I'd never heard of this book. No professor had ever mentioned it. It certainly never appeared on any professor's reading list. Then I read that most editors leave Is Shakespeare Dead off Mark Twain's list of books. They don't like what the book says, so the book never happened. In our modern civilized world, we no longer burn books. We just leave them off lists. Now, all this, which I was learning for the first time, wasn't so much about Shakespeare. Obviously, someone or some group wrote the plays and poems, and thank God we have them. No, this is about education, or rather miseducation. I had a right to this information, and yet it had been kept from me. And all I'd ever learned from all of the professors in all of the schools was there was no Shakespeare authorship question. And all they gave me was orthodoxy. Yes, orthodoxy, from the Greek orthos meaning true, and doxa meaning belief. Shakespeare wrote Shakespeare is not factual, it's not historical, it's a belief. Perhaps it's true. Perhaps it's true, but the only way to find out is to examine the evidence. And this had never happened. Why? Why was Shakespeare this untouchable God who must never be questioned? Particularly when there were these giants like Mark Twain and Sigmund Freud who said there was a question. There are times in a man's life when he becomes so angry, so furious, so murderously enraged, there's only one thing that person can do, and that's write and perform a one-man show. This was one of those times. The play I was going to write about the buffoon who believed Shakespeare did not write Shakespeare, that didn't happen. Instead, I adapted Mark Twain's Is Shakespeare Dead and debuted it at the 2002 Montreal Fringe Festival, and that is how I became a Shakespeare crackpot.